looking for an answer it doesn't have.
See? Even your brain knows you're screwed.
The body's filled with adrenaline right now, whether you know it or not. The heart's beating fast. It's getting a little harder to breathe. The neurobiological system is telling it to run, but your knees are too weak to move.
Fear is not real. The only place that fear can exist is in our thoughts of the future. It is a product of our imagination, causing us to fear things that do not at present and may not ever exist. That is near insanity. Do not misunderstand me. Danger is very real, but fear is a choice. We are all telling ourselves a story.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. 100% listener-supported radio. Reporting to danger. Unafraid. Right here, where information never sleeps. Revolution Radio.
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat. And with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other world. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Hello and welcome, friends, readers, listeners, and viewers from across America and around the world. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. And as always, we greatly appreciate those of you that have taken the time to join us in fellowship. You can find the live chat on our YouTube stream. It is Zen Garcia, and that's all one word, my name. And join us there for dialogue. And if you have questions, you can, pose your inquiry there. But I hope that everybody is doing well and that life finds all of you, your families, your loved ones, all your furry critters, blessed and of good health and well-being. It is a beautiful day here in Winder, Georgia, on the East Coast, United States of America. It was hot, but I do love the warm weather. I think we actually this week are reaching the 90s for the first time, and we are certainly moving towards summer. And in 2 weeks, we have Memorial Day, which is a holiday that here in the United States usually kicks off the beginning of summer. And so wherever you may be, I hope that, you are in a peaceful situation, that you're not having to be stressed or concerned, worried about any uncertainties, and that your children can sleep pleasantly and are not in any way fearful or threatened by any weirdness going on in the outside world. And I do pray for all the people there in Ukraine that are, having their homeland invaded and are having to contend with just the threat of hostilities. I can't imagine what it must be like to wake up to that kind of a situation. And for anybody, there's been war raging in the Middle East for a very long time. And one of the prophecies, I think, of this generation has been fulfilled recently with Damascus becoming a ruinous heap. And, Damascus is like the oldest continually inhabited city from ancient times, has a very old and continuous history, and it had never been leveled in the manner that it is now. And it's unfortunate, but as I said, this is a prophecy for our time, and being the fig tree generation, that this was also one of the indicators, the signs of the time of the end. And so, um, even though we, are accelerating towards the end of days, I do pray continuously for peace and safety, and that the Most High is long suffering to humanity, that He forgives us in our discretions, and that we are given more time as a race to repent and to come to know different, and to show our gratitude and our um, profound willingness to change. And, things like that which was facing Nineveh and even Israel, that when Josiah the king decided to alter the situation of his country and the heart of his people, and put on sackcloth and ashes, and really got on his knees before the Most High, and had his countrymen follow him, an example that there was an altering of timeline for the events and the judgment that was coming, even for Nineveh, though, that was only for a short time, and the falling away. Again, they were brought to the destruction that had been proclaimed upon them. But, the reason I say this is my son and I, we finished our Revelation study just a couple of weeks ago, where we went chapter by chapter and verse by verse through the book of Revelation. And this is a manuscript for the end times, and speaks about the apocalypse, which means the revealing of that which was hidden. And also, apocalypse is synonymous, people believe, with the wrath of God being poured out on the wicked, and of the judgment that is said to be held back until the end of days, and that there's a fulfillment of what is a climax of all of history. And I do believe that we are living in that time, and that the Most High, through His Son, the Savior Messiah, gave us a word and a vision to the apostles of how the blooming of the fig tree, which I believe is the regathering of the nation state of Israel and its manifestation as a nation once more, and that it also inherited its capital, Jerusalem, which is something that never, ever has happened in the history of the world. And for this, a lot of people may not think the event to be significant, but it really is uncanny. It's a one of a kind happening, and that even though manifest and pushed by the United Nations, the world government, one world order, of the elites, and the orchestration of those events, it still was a fulfillment of prophecy. But anyways, this evening I will be going into what is a follow-up on the Clementine Homilies, and it is a book like the book of Acts, which shares the travels of the Apostle Peter with who later became Pope Clement, and that he was one of the apostles that doing the acts of the Great Commission to go forth and share the gospel, that he was a witness to and walked with Peter in the times that led up to his martyrdom. And so I thought, even though I have specific passage and chapters and things which are focused on the coming and the story of the fallen angels, and how their rebellion against the Most High led to them in the story of Enoch, taking wives of all which they chose, and that coupling with the daughters of Cain, they created a race of giants, which in mythology have been known as the demigods, and that the stories of these particular hybrid beings has been highlighted and emphasized all throughout the ages, and that this has become the mythologies of the world, and most people don't understand. They think that this is all fairy tale and make believe, and yet these stories are very significant in that they carry an underlying truth which has been largely misconstrued by the world, and that few understand the invasion of the rebel angels and the fallen watchers and their displacement from the heavens. They're leaving their place of habitation to settle and abandon their first estate. They came here to the earth and have as what has been depicted as these dragon-like entities, these reptilian beings, that in the antediluvian times, the worship of the feathered serpent was the predominant religion of the world. And so this was something that had swept up and led astray everybody. And what is very intriguing is that it is still this way, that the scriptures even proclaim that that old serpent, that ancient dragon, that he would deceive the entirety of the world, that he had done so in ancient times, and that he would continue to do so leading into the future. And so the story that is found revealed within the Clementine Homilies, as well as that of the Book of Enoch, the Kebra Nagast, and so many other places, the really revealing of what is the little understand story of the fallen angels taking wives from amongst the daughters of humanity, that in the Greek mythology we see supposedly the supreme being, Zeus, the father of all the gods, that he was said to be involved numerous times in the seduction and rape of earthly and mortal women. Even Solon, that he was given the story. He was an Athenian senator that visiting Egypt, he was told the ancient story of how his people had triumphed a very long time ago over the Atlanteans, and that the Atlanteans were a superior race from the fallen angels that they had in their time, in very ancient times, that they had conquered most of the world, and that they were attempting to establish a new world order where they could dominate and rule in impunity over all the countries of the world, but that it was the Athenians that stepped up and prevented them from carrying out their, what they felt was their destiny. And because of that, they were stopped. But there was also the interdiction of the Most High, in that he brought judgment upon them. And that in the Atlantean mythology, we have the story of the punishment that was exacted upon the fallen angels, and how their culture, their civilization, which was an island paradise centered in somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, is what is said. I believe it was more near and located towards the northern pole and that particular region, and that the mythology of the Hyperboreans is connected to the demigods which lived in that area in the ancient times. But that their land being judged by the heavens above, that lightning and thunder and hailstones and brimstones and fire were rained down from the heavens upon these people, which, even though they were angelic beings, ethereal, that they took on mortal embodiment, that the sentence of being placed under the authority of death, that they lost their immortal bright nature, and that they took on what was substance, and they became substantial beings. And so the tidal waves and the tsunamis were also unleashed, and the waves of the sea roaring came in upon the land and destroyed, carried away, swept up the boulders and the cities that were megalithic in size, and usually able to withstand, but not the judgment that was brought upon them in this time. And that they were also, the earthquakes were opened up beneath them, so that the ocean swallowed them, and the land, being submerged, disappeared in a single night. And that they were so completely eradicated that there was only a myth accompanying their legend, and that a memory of who they were and how they disappeared remains even unto this day. And so that is what led to the diaspora. That is what led to the Atlanteans moving into different areas, into different regions of the world. And that's also why we see that in this time after Atlantis, that all the cultures of the world came up in similarity, though they were, thousands of miles apart from one another, and that they all built pyramidal type construction into their megalithic complexes, and they utilize Cyclopean architecture to develop, and that they would build these observatories to watch the patterns and the movements of the luminaries, and that they would mark in their cities the solstices and the equinoxes, which was a technology that certainly humanity did not have ability to understand. And yet, this is all achieved at a time when humanity was supposedly hunter and gatherers, and that they had not yet even begun to farm the land. And yet the fallen angels were building cities with technology that we can't rival today. We can't even replicate the things that they had done in ancient times. And so these are the stories that are preserved within the Clementine Homilies, as well as in many of the books that I've written, specifically the last series that I wrote, which was a 2-book, The Pre-Adamites and the Antediluvian World, and also the Dragon Lords, the Antediluvian Kings, which goes into in great detail and reveals in more elaboration than what I could speak about and tell you in 2 hours of, doing and focusing on this topic in the entirety of this broadcast. That I've literally done, 8-hour session on the information that is found in that series about these topics. And so if you want to gain further insight and to understand how the antediluvian age ties into the Second World Age, which is the timeline of the 7,000 years that we live in now, then those are the books that you would want to read, because they will unlock the riddle of how the First World Age and how there's a longer timeline, that the earth is older than 7,000 years, very much older. And yet it's only because people don't understand fully what is revealed within the scriptures of how the heavens and the earth being created by Elohim, that the earth became without form and void, and that darkness was upon the seas, that the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. These things speak about a war in heaven and how the First World Age was destroyed, as 2 Peter speaks about in chapter 3, that the world that then was, that this world was destroyed in what is a catabo, that it was submerged and swallowed up by water so that there was no land. And that's why we see in what is the Reformation, the recreation of the earth, that the dry land wasn't elevated above sea level until the third day. So that it was, everything was completely submerged. There was no land to be inhabited by the creatures. Life had been consequentially destroyed by the war in heaven. And, we see that even the pre-Adamites in Genesis 1:26 through 28, that they were created to inhabit the earth, and they were told to go forth, to be fruitful, to multiply, and to replenish the earth. And so all of these are secrets that are hinted to, spoken about, even in these homilies, and are important to understand because they will tie together what is the mythology of the world with the ancient mysteries, the oral traditions, the things that are being brought forth by discoveries. Now with satellite imagery and the technologies where things are being used to look through the denseness of the forests, and that, the architecture is able to be seen through the overgrowth, and that this is revealing megalithic structures and city complexes all over the world, that there were more cities built in the ancient times than people have completed in the modern age, which is absolutely mind-blowing. That there are pyramids everywhere, hidden in plain sight, that many of the mountains that people grew up outside of in their cities and villages, that these places are actually artificial and covered over, and yet nobody even realized that there's so much architecture, even in Antarctica, that these kind of things are being revealed, that ice that is 2 miles thick, and how many years and epochs of time have had to pass for these areas to be covered over by ice. And yet there are pyramids down there, which is interesting because a long time ago I shared on a show that I had with Hijacker how I had a dream that in my dream I saw that there were these pyramidal complexes in Antarctica and the southern latitudes of what is the outer rim, the ends of the earth, and that these places were dormant, that they were constructed, built by the angels, the fallen angels in very ancient times. But that, it getting cold and that the ice getting thick, and that, these places were swallowed up by the frozen landscape. They are still there. And we see in the, and I'm going to go into these very soon. I just wanted to share this with all of you because I think it's very important to understand, and it does relate to these homilies. But even during World War II, that the Nazis were said to be in contact with these ancient aliens, and that they were instructed to go there and to start developing, and that they were given the coordinates for an ancient base, and that they built a place called New Schwabenland, and that this area, this base, which they built, was said to be built upon a much older structure, and that they were just building on top of and uniting their base with something that had already been there. And so, very intriguing. All this is very intriguing to consider. And so let me go ahead and we'll get into the homilies themselves. But I'm going to read the first portion to share with you the opening of the homilies that lead up to the martyrdom of Peter. And then we'll go into some of the other selected archives of, the fallen angels, the ancient mythologies of these particular deities, and the kind of behaviors and the things that they did which are, again, captured and shared by these stories. So, all right. This is, again, the Clementine Homilies, which my daughter-in-law Joy just put together and released for us in compilation, and you can find it at sacredwordpublishing.com. And as I said, they contain the narratives, like the book of Acts, the stories of the travels of Peter and Clement, and that they bring forth a lot of information that is largely obscure and unknown by most of the world when it comes to some of the topics contained within them. All right, the first one is of the Epistle of Peter to James. And James was the brother, the half-brother of Christ, and he became the archbishop of the Jerusalem church, which was one of the first churches to be established after the crucifixion, the resurrection of the Savior Messiah. Peter to James, the Lord and Bishop of the Holy Church, under the Father of all, through Jesus Christ, wishes peace always. The doctrine of reserve. Knowing, my brother, your eager desire after that which is for the advantage of us all, I beg and beseech you not to communicate to any one of the Gentiles the books of my preachings, which I sent to you, nor to any one of our own tribe before trial. But if anyone has been proved and found worthy, then to commit them to him, after the manner in which Moses delivered his books to the 70 who succeeded to his share. Wherefore also the fruit of that caution appears even till now. For his countrymen keep the same rule of monarchy and polity everywhere, being unable in any way to think otherwise, or to be led out of the way of the much indicating scriptures. For according to the rule delivered to them, they endeavor to correct the discordances of the scriptures. If anyone haply, not knowing the traditions, is confounded at the various utterances of the prophets, wherefore they charge no one to teach unless he has first learned how the scriptures must be used. And thus they have amongst them one God, one law, and one hope. Chapter 2. Misrepresentation of Peter's doctrine. In order, therefore, that the like may also happen to those among us, as to these 70, give the books of my preachings to our brethren, with the like mystery of initiation, that they may indoctrinate those who wish to take part in teaching. For if it be not so done, our words of truth will be rent into many opinions. And this I know, not as being a prophet, but as already seeing the beginning of this very evil. For some men among the Gentiles have rejected my legal preaching, attaching themselves to certain lawless and trifling preaching of the man who is my enemy. And these things some have attempted while I am still alive, to transform my words by certain various interpretations in order to the dissolution of the law, as though I also myself were of such a mind, but did not freely proclaim it, which God forbid. For such a thing were to act in opposition to the law of God, which was spoken by Moshe and was borne witness to by our Lord in respect of its eternal continuance. For thus he spoke, the heavens and the earth shall pass away, but one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law. And this he has said, that all things might come to pass. But these men, professing, I know not how to know my mind, undertake to explain my words, which they have heard of me, more intelligently than I who spoke them, telling their catechumens that this is my meaning, which indeed I never thought of. But if while I'm still alive they dare thus to misrepresent me, how much more will those who shall come after me dare to do so? Chapter 3, Initiation. Therefore, that no such thing may happen, for this end I have prayed and besought you not to communicate the books of my preaching, which I have sent you to any one, whether of our own nation or of another nation. Before trial. But if anyone, having been tested, has been found worthy, then to hand them over to him according to the initiation of Moses, by which he delivered his books to the 70, who succeeded to his chair, in order that thus they may keep the faith, and everywhere deliver the rule of truth, explaining all things after our traditions, lest being themselves dragged down by ignorance, being drawn into error by conjectures, after their mind, they bring others into the like pit of destruction. Now, the things that seem good to me, I have fairly pointed out to you. And what seems good to you, do you, my Lord, becomingly perform. Farewell. Chapter 4. An adoration concerning the receivers of the book. Therefore, James, having read the epistle, sent for the elders, and having read it to them, said, Our Peter has strictly and becomingly charged us concerning the establishing of the truth, that we should not communicate the books of his preachings, which have been sent to us, to anyone at random, but to one who is good and religious, and who wishes to teach, and who is circumcised and faithful. And these are not all to be committed to him at once, that if he be found in Judaism, in the first, the others may not be entrusted to him. Wherefore let him be proved not less than 6 years. And then, according to the initiation of Moshe, he that is to deliver the book should bring him to a river or a fountain which is living water, where the regeneration of the righteous takes place, and should make him not swear, for that is not lawful, but to stand by the water and adjure, as we ourselves, when we were regenerated, were made to do, for the sake of not sinning. And let him say, I take to witness heaven, earth, water, in which all things are comprehended. And in addition to all these, that air also which pervades all things, and without which I cannot breathe. That I shall always be obedient to him who gives me the books of the preachings, and those same books which he may give me, I shall not communicate to anyone in any way. Either by writing them, or giving them in writing, or giving them to a writer, either myself or by another, or through any other initiation, or trick, or method, or by keeping them carelessly, or placing them before anyone. Or granting him permission to use them, or in any way or manner whatsoever, communicating them to another, unless I shall ascertain one to be worthy, as I myself have been judged, or even more so, and that after a probation of not less than 6 years, but to one who is religious and good, chosen to teach, as I received them, so I will commit them, doing these things, also according to the will of my bishop. But otherwise, though he were my son, or my brother, or my friend, or otherwise in any way pertaining to me by kindred, if he be unworthy, that I will not vouchsafe the favor to him, as is not meet, and I shall neither be terrified by plot nor mollified by gifts. But if even it should ever seem to me that the books of the preachings given to me are not true, I shall not so communicate them, but shall give them back. And when I go abroad, I shall carry them with me, whatever of them I happen to possess. But if I be not minded to carry them about with me, I shall not suffer them to be in my house, but shall deposit them with my bishop, having the same faith and setting out from the same persons as myself. But if it befall me to be sick and in expectation of death, and if I be childless, I shall act in the same manner. But if I die, having a son who is not worthy or not yet capable, I shall act in the same manner. For I shall deposit them with my bishop, in order that if my son, when he grows up, be worthy of the trust, he may give them to him as his father's bequest, according to the terms of this engagement. And that I shall thus do. I again call to witness heaven, earth, water, in which all things are enveloped, and in addition to all these, the all-pervading air, without which I cannot breathe, that I shall always be obedient to him who gives me these books of the preachings, and shall observe in all things as I have engaged, or even shall be apart with the holy ones. But to me, oh, and shall observe in all things as I have engaged, or even something more. To me, therefore, keeping this covenant, there shall be a part with the holy ones. But to me, doing anything contrary to what I have covenanted, may the universe be hostile to me, and the all-pervading ether, and the God who is over all, to whom none is superior, than whom none is greater. But if even I should come to the acknowledgement of another God, I now swear by him also, be he or be he not, that I shall not do otherwise. And in addition to all these things, if I shall lie, I shall be accursed living and dying, and shall be punished with everlasting punishment. And after this, let him partake of bread and salt with him who commits them to him. We're almost to the martyrdom. Chapter 5, the Adoration accepted. James, having thus spoken, the elders were in an agony of terror. And therefore James, perceiving that they were greatly afraid, said, Hear me, brethren and fellow servants. If we should give the books to all indiscriminately, and they should be corrupted by any daring men, or be perverted by interpretations, as you have heard that some have already done, it will remain even for those who really seek the truth, always to wander in error. Wherefore it is better that they should be with us, and that we should communicate them with all the aforementioned care. To those who wish to live piously and to save others. But if anyone, after taking this adjuration, shall act otherwise, he shall with good reason incur eternal punishment. For why should not he who is the cause of the destructions of others not be destroyed himself? The elders, therefore, being pleased with the sentiments of James, exclaimed, Blessed be he who, as foreseeing all things, has graciously appointed you as our bishop. And when they had said this, we all rose up and prayed to the Father and God of all. To whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. Okay, this I should be able to finish Peter's martyrdom before we go to break. This is the epistle to Peter to James. Clement to James, the Lord and the Bishop of bishops, who rules Jerusalem, the holy church of the Hebrews, and the churches everywhere excellently founded by the providence of God, with the elders and the deacons and the rest of the brethren. Peace be always. Chapter 1, Peter's martyrdom. Be it known to you, my Lord, that Simon, who for the sake of the true faith and the most sure foundation of his doctrine, was set apart to be the foundation of the church, and for this end was by Jesus himself, with his truthful mouth, named Peter, the first fruits of our Lord, the first of the apostles, to whom first the Father revealed the Son, whom the Christ with good reason blessed. The called and elect and associate at table, and in the journeyings of Christ, the excellent and approved disciple, who as being fittest of all, was commanded to enlighten the darker part of the world, namely the West, and was enabled to accomplish it. And to what extent do I lengthen my discourse? Not wishing to indicate what is said, which yet of necessity, though reluctantly, I must tell you. He himself, by reason of his immense love towards men, having come as far as Rome, clearly and publicly testifying in opposition to the wicked one who withstood him, that there is to be a good king over all the world, while saving men by his God-inspired doctrine, himself by violence exchanged this present existence for life. The next portion is the ordination of Clement, but we're going to stop there. We are almost at break. And then we're going to go into some of the other fallen angel stuff that I wanted to speak about, the mythologies of the demigods and so on and so forth. But at least I was able to make it through the first portion of the manuscript that I wanted to cover and to share with you about the, how these books were reserved even for those that were found to be worthy. And that this was the case in many of the scriptures, even Ezra, when he and the four scribes that joined him in writing down and bringing forth the teachings that were lost in the fire when the Holy Temple was destroyed. That these teachings were withheld from much of the lay people, and that it was preserved for an elect alone. That yes, there was a portion that was given to everybody, but there was a larger portion which was mostly kept only for the elect. All right, we'll be right back in the second hour.
This book is one of those that comes from the discourse of the Ante-Nicene Church Fathers, and it was over, of course, what to include within the canon and what to authorize as the books that the church okay for public dissemination, and it was, of course, excluded. And yet, like the book of Acts, it covers much information between what was a representative of Satan, Simon the Magus, and Peter, as he went through his travels all throughout the land. And they kept coming and butting heads with one another, and Simon kept leading astray the people. And he had really actually a lot of good questions that helped in the dialogue of the text and the information that is brought forth within this book, can help people to understand not only the times and what the apostles were going through, but also it speaks about the fallen angels in great detail, the origins of evil, even the giants and how they came to be within the world, which is part of that whole theme of Genesis 6, the sons of God mating with the daughters of man, creating a race of giants, how they were here before and after the flood, which is one of those esoteric subjects that many of us have now begun to investigate in great detail. And so this, like the book of Enoch, speaks about that and covers it and shares the information about how these fallen angels are not gods, even though they are and have been celebrated by cultures and civilizations as holding this co-omnipotence with the Most High. But they are created angelic beings, and being cast out, they have always now become what we refer to as legion, and what Paul refers to as the powers, the principalities, the rulers of darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places. And so there's great clarity brought out within the discourses of this book. It also speaks about and confirms that the devil is the father of the bad seed, serpent seed, the feminine Holy Spirit, and how she is part of the pre-existent triune Godhead, which the Israelites worship and which most people still don't understand. All of those things are brought forth in this manuscript as well. And so it will help to give you perspective on much that most people have never read about.
If you think for 1 second that the Capitol will ever treat us fairly, you are lying to yourselves. Because we know who they are and what they do. This is what they do, and we must fight back. You can torture us and bomb us. Fire is catching. And if we burn, you burn with us.
Good evening.
Are you awake yet? I hope. We've tried and we've tried for years and years to use passive resistance and loud voices to make a change. The time is over. Your governments around the world have no other goal than to decimate your entire existence at the hands of the bankers and the elites. The war is coming, and it's your choice to decide if you want to be a warrior or a victim. Denial is not a choice anymore. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
All right, welcome back, everybody, and thanks again for joining us this evening. I am your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio, which can be found at freedomslips.com. We do have 2 streams, Studios A and Studios B, and that there are different hosts which are, brought to you I think most 24 hours a day on both Studios A and B, and that we've got a wide, eclectic, and diverse group of individuals coming to you with truth in all aspect, and as far as being a family of truth seekers and revealers. I'm greatly honored to be part of all those that do the work in this particular format, and that Freedom Slips has been a platform for truth for a very long time now. I can't even remember when I first began doing shows here, but it's been a very long time ago, and there's been a lot of good people, a lot of great hosts that have also come and go, that have done incredible work in sharing their perspective and unveiling, and wiping away the cobwebs that are hiding the true matrix and the grand deception as it plays out in our everyday lives. And I remember that, even a few years back, most people laughed at the things that we spoke about and the things that we talked about and the things that we said. And yet now, people realize that conspiracy theorists, that these kind of individuals were just ahead of their time, and that the conspiracies are not theories, they are realities. And so a lot of people have joined the ranks, so to speak, and are looking for truth in any manner that they can find them. and that there are few out there that have a gift of discernment and that have in the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and a mind to understand, that are able to sound the alarm and to bring others and to warn them, to blow the shofar and to share with them the things that they have learned over the years, to prepare them, to lead and guide them, to help them to understand the bigger picture of what we are truly contending with as world. You know, this is a bloodline war, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. There is enmity, which is extreme hatred, that this war has been waged since the garden and will continue until the return of the Messiah. And that was the promise. Let both grow together until the time of the end. And in the time of the end, I will send my angels forth to gather the wheat for preservation and the tares for burning. And so until that time, you know, the war, the battle for the souls of humanity will be ongoing. And it's important for you to understand how your own salvation, how eternal life is weighed upon the scales here in this lifetime, in that the weak and the righteous, the elect, the meek, they will inherit the earth, and that the wicked, they will be judged and condemned, and that finally righteousness shall prevail. This is the promise. This is the promise, and thank God, because, you know, the scriptures also say that unless the days be shortened, there should be no flesh left. But for the elect's sake, the days shall be shortened, and the time shall be accelerated. And thank God for that, because, you know, things are insane. I mean, look at all that we've had to contend with in the last 3 or 4 years with the pandemic, the scamdemic, and all the people now taking, you know, 4 snake bites and then boosters on top. I mean, they've already tricked people into taking and getting in line for a lot of these poisons. And we yet don't even know the repercussions of what is going to happen. And now they're mandating this for children under 5 years of age, not just, you know, on top of already what they are already prescribed and mandated, but now, you know, even boosters on top. It's just, it's insane. It's a crazy world. All right, let us continue. The Clementine Homilies is a collection of 20 books, which each one of these books has numerous chapters in them. And there is a lot that is covered. I forget exactly. Let me see how. "310 pages. So lots of information. All right. Let us continue. This is called Phanes and Pluto, which, you know, Pluto was the god of the underworld that Zeus and he and Poseidon, Neptune, that they ruled over the world, that they had split it into 3 portions. And so anyways, this is a story about them. This egg then, which was the first substance, growing somewhat hot, was broken by the living creature within. And then there took shape and came forth something, such as Orpheus also speaks of, where he says, when the capacious egg was broken, etc. And so by the mighty power of that which appeared, Phanes, and came forth, the globe attained coherency and maintained order, while itself took its seat, as it were on the summit of heaven, their ineffable mystery, diffusing light through endless ages. But the productive matter left inside, now this globe that it's talking about, in my opinion, is the dome of the firmament, because it is sort of like a globe, but it's not speaking about the earth. It's talking about the division. While itself took its seat, as it were, on the summit of heaven, there in ineffable mystery diffusing light through endless ages. But the productive matter left inside the globe separated the substances of all things. For first, its lower part, just like the dregs, sank downward of its own weight, and this they called Pluto, from its gravity and weight and great quantity pollu of underlying matter, styling it the king of Hades and the dead. Chapter 7, Poseidon, Zeus, and Metis. When then they say that this primordial substance, although most filthy and rough, was devoured by Kronos, that is time, this is to be understood in a physical sense, as meaning that it sank downwards, and the water which flowed together after this first sediment and floated on the surface of the first substance, they called Poseidon. And then what remained the purest and noblest of all, for it was translucent fire, they called Zeus, from its glowing nature. Now since fire ascends, this was not swallowed and made to descend by time or Kronos, but as I said, the fiery substance, since it has life in it and naturally ascends, flew right up into the air, which from its purity is very intelligent, by his own proper heat. Then Zeus, that is the glowing substance, draws up what is left in the underlying moisture, to wit that very strong and divine spirit, which they called Metis. Chapter 8, Pallas and Hera. And this, when it had reached the summit of the ether, was devoured by it, moisture being mixed with heat, so to say, and causing in it that ceaseless palpitation, it begot intelligence, which they call Pallas. That this palpitating Palisthea, and this is artistic wisdom, by which the ethereal artificer wrought out the whole world. and from all pervading Zeus, that is from this very hot ether, air, extends all the way to our earth. And this they call Hera. Wherefore, because it has come below the ether, which is the purest substance, just as a woman, as regards purity, when the two were compared to see which was the better, she was rightly regarded as the sister of Zeus, in respect of her origin from the same substance, but as his spouse, as being inferior like a wife. Chapter 9, Artemis. And Hera we understand to be a happy tempering of the atmosphere, and therefore she is very fruitful. But Athena, as they call Pallas, was reckoned a virgin, because on account of the intense heat she could produce nothing. And in similar fashion Artemis is explained. For her they take as the lowest depth of air, and so they called her a virgin, because she could not bear anything on account of the extreme cold, and that troubled and drunken composition, which arises from the upper and lower vapors, they called Dionysus, as troubling the intellect. And the water under the earth, which is in nature indeed one, but which flows through all the paths of the earth, and is divided into many parts, they called Osiris, as being cut in pieces. And they understand Adonis as favorable seasons, Aphrodite as coition and generation, Demeter as the earth, the girl Persephone as seeds, and Dionysus some understand as the vine. Chapter 10. All such stories are allegorical. And I must ask you to think of all such stories as embodying some such allegory. Look on Apollo as the wandering sun, Peripolon, a son of Zeus who was also called Mithras, as completing the period of a year. And these said transformations of the all-pervading Zeus must be regarded as the numerous changes of the seasons, while his numberless wives you must understand to be years or generations. For the power which proceeds from the ether and passes through the air unites with all the years, and generations in turn, and continually varies them, and so produces or destroys the crops, and ripe fruits are called his children. The barrenness of some seasons being referred to unlawful union. Chapter 11, Clement has heard all this before. While Appian was allegorizing in this way, I became plunged in thought and seemed not to be following what he was saying. So he interrupted his discourse and said to me, "If you do not follow what I am saying, why should I speak at all?" And I answered, "Do not suppose that I do not understand what you say. I understand it thoroughly, and that the more that this is not the first time I have heard it, and that you may know that I am not ignorant of these things, I shall epitomize what you have said, and supply in their order as I have heard them from others. the allegorical interpretation of those stories you have omitted. And Appian said, do so. And so those things that I was reading about where, the guy was talking about how the gods were part of what is the established order of the world. This was all allegory, and he was talking about his interpretation of how the gods are the creation. And so Clement here is about to answer him. And in the story, just so you know, of the discourses of Peter and Clement, there were two main rivals that were trying to explain their perspective and their belief in the pantheon, and that was Simon the Magus, who was the arch rival of Peter, and this guy Appian, who was an arch nemesis of Clement. And so they're just trying to explain off, who the fallen angels were and their involvement in, and also the origin of evil within the world. The epitome of Appian's explanation. And I answered, I shall not at present speak particularly of that living egg, which was conceived by a happy combination out of the infinite matter, and from which, when it was broken, the masculo-feminine fannies leapt forth, as some say. I say little about all that up to the point when this broken globe attained coherency, there being left in it some of its marrow-like matter. And I shall briefly run over the description of what took place in it by the agency of this matter, with all that followed. For from Kronos and Rhea were born, as you say, that is, by time and matter. First Pluto, who represents the sediment, which settled down, and then Poseidon, the liquid substance in the middle, which floated over the heavier body below. And the third child, that is Zeus, is the ether, and as highest of all, it was not devoured, but as it is a fiery power, and naturally ascends, it flew up, as with a bound, to the very highest ether. Chapter 13. Kronos and Aphrodite. And the bonds of Kronos are the binding together of heaven and earth. As I have heard others allegorizing, and his mutilation is the separation and parting of the elements, for they all were severed and separated according to their respective natures, that each kind might be arranged by itself. And time no longer begets anything, but the things which have been begotten of it by a law of nature produce their successors. And the Aphrodite who emerged from the sea is the fruitful substance, which arises out of moisture, with which the warm spirit mixing causes that sexual desire and perfects the beauty of the world. Chapter 15. Peleus and Thetis, Prometheus, Achilles, and Polyxena. And the marriage banquet at which Zeus held the feast on the occasion of the marriage of the Nereid Thetis and the beautiful Peleus has in it this allegory, that you may know, Appian, that you are not the only one from whom I've heard this sort of thing. The banquet then is the world, and the 12 are these heavenly props of the fates called the zodiac. Prometheus is foresight, by which all things arose. Peleus is clay, namely that which was collected from the earth and mixed with Nereus, or water, to produce man. And from the mixing of the two, water and earth, the first offspring was not begotten, but fashioned complete and called Achilles, because he never put his lips to the breast. Still, in the bloom of life, he is slain by an arrow while desiring to have Polyxena. That is something other than the truth and foreign, zine, foreign to it. Death stealing on him through a wound in his foot. The judgment of Paris. And then Hera and Athena and Aphrodite and Eris and the apple and Hermes and the judgment and the shepherd have some such hidden meaning as the following. Hera is dignity, Athena manliness, Aphrodite pleasure, Hermes language which interprets thought, the shepherd Paris unreasoned and brutish, passion. Now if in the prime of life reason, that shepherd of the soul is brutish, does not regard its own advantage, will have nothing to do with manliness and temperance, chooses only pleasure, and will have nothing to do with manliness and temperance. Choose only pleasure and gives the prize to lust alone, bargaining that it is to receive in return from lust what may delight it. He who thus judges incorrectly will choose pleasure to his own destruction and that of his friends. And Eris is jealous, must be Eros. Jealous spite and the golden apples of Hesperides are perhaps riches by which occasionally even temperate persons like Hera are seduced. And manly ones like Athena are made jealous. So like Hera, they are seduced. And manly ones like Athena are made jealous so that they do things which do not become them. And the soul's beauty, like Aphrodite, is destroyed under the guise of refinement. To speak briefly, in all men, riches provoke evil, discord. The story of Hercules. And Hercules, who slew the serpent which led and guarded riches, is the true philosophical reason which, free from all wickedness, wanders all over the world, visiting the souls of men and chastising all it meets, namely men like fierce lions or timid stags, or savage boars or multiform hydras, and so, with all the other fabled labors of Hercules, they have all a hidden reference to moral valor. But these with all the other fabled labors of Hercules, they all have a hidden reference to moral valor. But these instances must suffice for all our time, would be insufficient if it were to go over each one. Chapter 17. They are blameworthy who have invented such stories. Now, since these things can be clearly profitably and without prejudice to piety, set forth in an open and straightforward manner. I wonder you call those men sensible and wise, who concealed them under crooked riddles, and overlaid them with filthy stories. And thus, as if impelled by an evil spirit, deceived almost all men. For either of these things are not riddles, but real crimes of the gods, in which case they should not have been exposed to contempt, nor should these their needs have been set before men at all as modest, or things falsely attributed to the gods were set forth in an allegory. And then, Apion, they whom you call wise erred in that, by concealing under unworthy stories things in themselves worthy. They led men to sin, and that not without dishonoring those whom they believed to be gods. Wherefore, do not suppose that they were wise men, but rather evil spirits who could cover honorable actions with wicked stories, in order that they who wish to imitate their betters may emulate these deeds of the so-called gods, which yesterday in my discourse I spoke so freely of, namely, the parricides, their murders of their children, their incests of all kinds, their shameless adulteries and countless impurities. The most impious of them are those who wish these stories to be believed, in order that they may not be ashamed when they do the like. If they had been disposed to act reverently, they ought, as I said a little ago, even if the gods really did the things which are sung of them, to have veiled their indecencies under more seemly stories, and not on the contrary as you say they did, when the deeds of the gods were honorable, clothed them in wicked and indecent forms, which even when interpreted can only be understood by much labour. And when they were understood by some, they indeed got for their much toil the privilege of not being deceived, which they might have had without the toil, while they who were deceived were utterly ruined. Those, however, who trace the allegories to a more honorable source, I do not object to, as for instance, those who explain one allegory by saying that it was wisdom which sprang from the head of Zeus. On the whole, it seemed to me more probable that wicked men, robbing the gods of their honor, ventured to promulgate these insulting stories. And so, I didn't read all of it, but in the first portion or the second portion of the Clementine Homilies, I read about the wickedness of the gods, their indecencies, the abomination that they practice, how even Zeus was said to, rape and to take wives of mortal women, how he would shapeshift into different forms in order to tempt them into sin and to lead them astray into wickedness. And this was not just him being the so-called father of the gods, but that all the so-called gods participated in such manner, and that they were involved in wickedness, abominations, sexual orgies where, parents would sleep with their children, daughters with their fathers, and sons with their mothers, and grandparents with their grandchildren. I mean, just all kind of depravities. And yet then these things were covered over by supposed allegories and explained away so that people would, not understand the stories or not understand the kind of abomination that the fallen angels were truly involved in. And so there were euphemisms that were created in order to make excuses for these so-called gods and the people that revered them, that worshiped them, that celebrated them. I mean, how and why would anybody celebrate as their god some wicked being that would practice, indulge, and lead humans into the involvement of sin and temptation and abomination and, I mean, all kinds of deplorable behaviors, even that of the sacrifice of children, which we know that the Gentile nations, the pagan nations, were involved deeply in, that we have in the Old Testament, a law that the Israelites not be involved in such practices. Because these are some of the things that they were engaged in. In fact, the worships of the gods and the worship of, the pantheon of gods and goddesses worldwide, that they were ritualized and that they incorporated practices where things like cannibalism, murder, victim and child sacrifice, the drinking of blood, even, what we had talked about as far as starfire, which I don't want to get into because it's so just gross, that these gods and that the elites that were of their bloodline, the children, the wicked one, that being of their father the devil, that they engaged in practices where they abuse even their own children, and that this was incorporated into their natural behavior so that these kind of things were normalized and passed down from generation to generation amongst these satanic bloodlines. That even you read in the story of the Bushes about, how George H.W., how he was involved in the Franklin cover-up, and that he would bring children to the White House and give them drugs, and that he and his aides and a lot of other politicians, representatives of high order, that they would engage in pedophilia, and that this thing was known, printed in the Washington Times, that there was a documentary called The Conspiracy of Silence that was made and supposed to be broadcast, and the day of its broadcast was pulled so that there was nothing but fuzz on the TV for the time of its, when it was supposed to air. But you can find that documentary online. And possibly you used to be able to. It's the story of those children that were involved in the Franklin cover-up. It's their testimonies. An individual named Paul Bonacci, who had a photographic memory. He kept a journal, a diary about the way that he and the people that were around him were used and abused by the Boys and Girls Club there in Omaha, Nebraska. That this was part of an elaborate scheme. And this was the first time that Catholic priests were fingered and accused of engaging in and taking part in pedophilia. And that because it was so wildly, the accusations were thought to be beyond belief. But as we know, the Catholic Church covered up not only this, but so many other reports of abuse by priests to young boys, young girls, to their parishioners. And they paid millions of dollars to keep all this on the down low. Hush, hush. And Senator John DeCamp, he just could not believe it. And being part of the Republican Party, he was sent down there to go investigate, to see whether there was any truth to these stories being a lawyer, and that he was hearing from a number of these children the same stories repeated over and over and over. So much so that he became convinced and decided to represent these kids pro bono. And he wanted to help them. And in fact, he had won his case. And he verified that one of the district attorneys, the one that had been appointed a case and that had a huge amount of evidence, because there was another thing that was involved. It was the closing of a savings and loan, a bank that was run by a guy named Larry Franklin. And this individual, he was one of the lead people that was flying around these kids on his private jet and giving them drugs and pimping them out to all these politicians. And then he had a guy named Rusty, I forget his last name right now, but he would take pictures and film them, in all these compromising positions with all these kids. And he had all this evidence. It was kept in the safety deposit boxes of this particular bank that Larry Franklin had run, and which he used as his own personal piggy bank. But anyways, when the feds went in to seize that savings and loan, all this photographic evidence and video, all this was seized as well. And all that was covered up because, as I said, the highest levels of politicians were involved, even the president. And this continued. Even the son of George H.W. Bush, Little Jr., the other George Bush, he was hiring a guy, what was his name? But anyways, this guy was a male prostitute, and he was bringing him into the White House. So he was also engaging in this kind of behavior. The story is crazy, but anyways, what I'm trying to say is that the elites and the gods that they worship are depraved, are out of their minds, sadistic. And it's hard for people to make sense of this. Like the whole thing, the Pizzagate that came up, and how they, were talking. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you probably won't be able to find it. You may find some, but we actually were flagged for talking about some of this stuff. I should probably not even be talking about it now, but it needs to be said. People need to know. But this is just this stuff ties back to ancient times, the Babylonian mystery religions. You know, this is why the whole theme of the worship of Moloch in the Old Testament, it is reprimanded by the Most High. And that this worship continues in a place called Bohemian Grove right here in California, where the redwoods, the giant redwood trees are. That there's a private club out there that has and is, you know, supported by a lot of high level politicians and wealthy elites and industrialists, and they gather for their summer solstice celebrations on the longest day of the year. And that this individual, Paul Bonacci, who was this kid that was in the conspiracy of silence, and that was, you know, being protected by Senator John DeCamp, who wrote this book, The Franklin Cover-Up. He spoke about being taken to this place and that they were abused there, and that he also witnessed somebody being sacrificed there by, you know, and that the body was thrown out of a helicopter to the men in black robes that were down below. And, you know, what they did with the bodies or whatever. But, you know, these kind of things were reported before it was even known to be Bohemian Grove. He just spoke about it as a place outside of San Francisco that had very big trees. I'm going to say one more thing about it, and then I'm going to shut up and continue. In, what book was it? I think it is Lucifer, Father of Cain, that I write about all these things as well. And so if you're interested, you can follow up there. All right, but let's continue. We only got a short time. Chapter 19, none of these allegories are consistent. Continuing with Clement. Nor do we find the poetical allegory about any of the gods consistent with itself. To go no further than the fashioning of the universe, the poets now say that nature was the first cause of the whole creation, now that it was mind. For say they, the first moving and mixture of the elements came from nature, but it was the foresight of mind which arranged them in order, even when they assert that it was nature which fashioned the universe, being unable absolutely to demonstrate this on account of the traces of design in the work. They inweave the foresight of mind in such a way that they are unable to entrap even the wisest. But we say to them, if the world arose from self-moved nature, how did it ever take proportion and shape, which cannot come but from a superintending wisdom, and can be comprehended only by knowledge, which alone can trace such things? If, on the other hand, it is by wisdom that all things subsist and maintain order, how can it be that those things arose from self-moved chance? And so he's basically, you know, speaking about also how the scientists believe in evolution and that the creation just came about from random chaos. This is insanity. Clement says, which cannot come but from a superintending wisdom and can be comprehended only by knowledge, which alone can trace such things. Very wise words, Clement. Yeah, you know, people believe that we evolved the monkeys. Well, how is it that the monkeys are still here? or that the apes are still here. And, where's the missing link? How did we evolve and they didn't? And they're still here with us. They having their own kind, and that they, being a creature set apart from us. It's lunacy. But yet people believe it. All right, these gods were really wicked magicians. Chapter 20. Then those who chose to make dishonorable allegories of divine things, as for instance that Metis was devoured by Zeus, have fallen into a dilemma because they did not see that they who in these stories about the gods indirectly taught physics denied the very existence of the gods, revolving all kinds of gods into mere allegorical representations of the various substances of the universe. And so it is more likely that the gods these persons celebrate were some sort of wicked magicians who were in reality wicked men, but by magic assumed different shapes, committed adulteries and took away life. And thus to the men of old who did not understand magic seemed to be gods by the things that they did. And the bodies and tombs of these men are to be seen in many towns. Their graves are still to be seen, meaning that they died. They are not gods. For instance, as I have mentioned already, in the Caucasian mountains, there is shown the tomb of a certain Kronos, a man, and a fierce monarch who slew his children. And the son of this man, called Zeus, became worse than his father, and having by the power of magic been declared ruler of the universe, he committed many adulteries and inflicted punishment on his father and uncles, and so died. And the Cretans show his tomb, and in Mesopotamia there lie buried a certain Helios at Atyr, and a certain Selene at Carre, a certain Hermes, a man lies buried in Egypt, Ares in Thrace, Aphrodite in Cyprus, Asclepius in Epidaurus, and the tombs of many other such persons are to be seen and found. Chapter 22. Their contemporaries therefore did not look on them as gods. Thus, to right-thinking men, it is clear that they were admitted to be mortals, and their contemporaries, knowing that they were mortal, when they died, paid them no more heed, and it was length of time which clothed them with the glory of gods. Nor need you wonder that they who lived in the times of Asclepius and Hercules were deceived, or the contemporaries of Dionysus or any other of the men of that time, when even Hector in Ilium and Achilles in the island of Leuce are worshipped by the inhabitants of those places, and the Opantines worship Patroclus, and the Rhodanians Alexander of Macedonia. But they, because they had at first no experience of evils, being insensible to the gift of good things, were turned to ingratitude by abundance of food and luxuries, so that even thought that there is no providence, since they had not by previous labor got good things as the reward of righteousness, inasmuch as no one of them had fallen into any suffering or disease or any other necessity, so that, as is usual for men afflicted on account of wicked transgression, they should look about for the God who is able to heal them. But immediately after their despite, which proceeded from fearlessness and secure luxury, a certain just punishment met them, as following from a certain arranged harmony, removing from them good things, as having hurt them, introducing evil things instead, as advantageous. I was about to go into the metamorphosis of the angels, how they fell, and all that. But I don't have time. For other spirits who inhabit the heaven, the angels who dwell in the lowest region, being grieved at the ingratitude of men to God, asked that they might come into the life of men, that really becoming men, by more intercourse they might convict those who had acted ungratefully towards him, and might subject everyone to adequate punishment. When therefore their petition was granted, they metamorphosized themselves into every nature, for being of a more godlike substance, they are easily to assume any form. So they became precious stones, goodly pearl, and the most beauteous purple, and choice gold, and all matter that is held in most esteem. And they fell into the hands of some and into the bosoms of others, and suffered themselves to be stolen by them. They also changed themselves into beasts, reptiles, fishes, and birds, into whatsoever they please. These things also the poets among yourselves, by reason of fearlessness, sing as they befell, attributing to one the many and diverse doings of all. Well, that's all we're going to be able to cover this evening. I hope you enjoyed. Be blessed. Good night and shalom.
Thank you everybody for joining us for this video and this broadcast. We appreciate all of you and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.